For 3 years the pack waited. For 3 years the king prepared. One ritual, one sacred flame, one night that would determine the strength of an entire territory for a generation. The Ashbourne territories, the strongest pack in a generation, and a king who had never, not once, chosen instinct over duty, until the wind shifted.
You cannot! The alignment! Magnus!
And somewhere in the dark, a girl who should not have been there ran. She had heard stories of what happened to those who broke the Valewood's laws. None of those stories ended with anyone walking home.
I wouldn't.
She was a servant, rough hands, calloused palms, a gray linen dress and 3 silver marks she should never have agreed to earn. He was a king, ancient power, a wolf that had never recognized anything, until her. But some things were never about rank. Some things were never about rules. Some things were decided the moment a wolf's instinct recognized a flame it had been waiting centuries to find.
You are the single greatest threat to the stability of this pack I have encountered in 40 years of service.
Then maybe I should stop being invisible.
Some bonds are not chosen, they are remembered. She was just a servant, hidden among the trees, until the Alpha King abandoned the sacred ritual to hunt her. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The ritual had taken 3 years to prepare. 3 years of fasting, of prayers carved into bark, of blood offerings left at the roots of the Valewood's oldest trees. 3 years of the pack holding its breath, waiting for the night the moon would finally bleed red and their king would complete his bond to the sacred flame. The spiritual anchor that kept their territory alive, their wolves strong, their bloodlines blessed. And Magnus Dreven, Alpha King of the Ashbourne, was about to throw all of it away because of a smell. It hit him mid-invocation. Not like a scent should hit, gradually, curiously, carried on a wandering wind. This was an ambush. Cedar and rain. Wild jasmine bruised by bare feet. Something older underneath. Something that smelled like the earth before men had names for it. It bypassed every rational thought in his mind and went straight to the part of him that was not a king, not a diplomat, not a symbol. The part of him that was still a predator. His hand, outstretched over the flame, went completely still. The high priestess, Seraphine, didn't notice at first. She was chanting, her white robes lit gold by the ceremonial fire, her voice threading through the clearing in low, ancient rhythms. Around her, 100 wolves knelt in perfect formation, heads bowed, palms flat against the cold earth, waiting for the moment their king's power would pulse through the bond like a heartbeat through a body. Magnus's jaw tightened. Where is that coming from? He turned his head, just slightly, toward the tree line. The Valewood stretched beyond the clearing's torchlit edge, dark and dense and whispering. No pack member, no outsider, no creature was permitted within a mile of this ground tonight. The perimeter had been cleared. Guards had swept the woods 3 times at sundown. And yet, there, barely visible between 2 ancient oaks, a flicker of movement. A pale hand catching the moonlight for a fraction of a second before disappearing into shadow. Magnus's wolf roared inside him. My king. Seraphine's voice cut through the fog. The flame is at its peak. Another minute and we lose the alignment. He knew that. Lose the alignment, and the pack would go another decade without the sacred flame's blessing. Crops would thin. Wolves would weaken. The territory's protective wards would erode like stone underwater. A king did not abandon his people's future for a smell. He pressed his palm flat against the offering stone. He closed his eyes. He reached for the flame's pull, that ancient warmth that had guided Ashborn alphas for 6 generations. The wind shifted. Cedar, rain, jasmine, her, closer now. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was so low, so controlled, that it took Seraphine 3 full seconds to understand what she was hearing. He was apologizing. In advance. "Magnus." But he was already moving. The entire clearing seemed to inhale at once. 100 wolves lifted their heads, watching their unbreakable, immovable king step away from the sacred flame, with less than 60 seconds remaining. Seraphine's voice rose behind him, sharp and disbelieving. He didn't stop. The flame guttered once, and died. The clearing plunged into silence so absolute that every wolf present would later swear they heard it. The exact moment their king crossed into the Valewood, and somewhere deep in the dark, a girl gasped and ran. Alina ran. She had heard stories of what happened to those who broke the Valewood's laws. None of those stories ended with anyone walking home. Low branches whipped across her arms. She didn't feel them. She couldn't feel anything except the darkness behind her and the throat-closing certainty that what was following her through these trees was not something she could outrun. Her lungs burned. Her bare feet found roots by accident and rocks by misfortune. Her legs were shaking, not from cold, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes before collapse, when the body starts negotiating with the mind about how much longer it can lie about being fine. Move, move, move. If she survived this, and she probably wouldn't, she was never agreeing to another bet. The rational part of her brain tried. He's a king. He has a ritual to finish. You're nobody, a servant. He wouldn't. Then she heard it. Not footsteps. Not snapping branches. Silence. Deliberate, controlled, hunting silence. Moving parallel to her through the trees, and keeping pace without effort. The small, rational voice went completely quiet. Alina ran harder. She broke through a curtain of hanging moss and hit the creek's edge with 3 feet of momentum she hadn't planned for, her toes finding the slick edge of the first stone and sliding. She threw her arms out, caught her balance, stood there calculating. Across meant fast current, cold water, maybe survival. Along the bank meant the tree line, meant cover, meant I wouldn't. She spun. The shoes she'd been carrying went flying. Her foot hit the slick rock and the world lurched sideways, and she was already falling when his hand closed around her wrist. The world tilted. Not from fear. From something worse. Heat, not his, hers, climbed up her arm and settled somewhere behind her ribs, and she hated how easily it found a home there. He pulled her upright with no apparent effort. And then he was just standing there, and she became acutely, humiliatingly aware of every detail between them. He smelled like smoke and pine and something darker, something that made her think of storms held back by sheer will. She probably smelled like soap and 3 back-to-back scrubbing shifts. She looked at his hands, clean, strong, unscarred, the hands of a man who wielded power so completely he'd never needed to prove it on his own skin. Then she looked at her own, rough, calloused. The hands of someone who scrubbed floors so nobles didn't have to. He should have been dragging her back to the clearing for judgment. Instead, he was looking at her like she was the judgment. She didn't understand. She hated not understanding. Why wasn't he hurting her? The question sat in her chest like a stone. He released her, stepped back, put 1 careful yard of distance between them like it was a wall he could believe in. Her weight shifted to her back foot without conscious decision. Instinct, muscle memory, the body voting for survival, while the mind was still catching up. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Something in her spine stayed straight. It made no sense. Servants bowed, servants folded, but something in her, something she had never named, refused. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice didn't rise at the end the way questions did. It sat there like a fact waiting to be confirmed. He asked for her name like he had the right to it. She gave it anyway, because saying no to him felt impossible. "Alina," she said. "Alina Voss, servant, third house, east wing." A beat. "My king." The title landed between them like a stone in still water. "Tell me, Alina Voss," he said quietly. "What were you doing in the Valewood tonight?" Her jaw set. She didn't answer. Behind them, through the trees, torchlight flickered. Voices. The pack was moving into the Valewood. Alina was still at the creek's edge. He was still between her and the trees. And she had just realized she wasn't sure if she was trapped with him or trapped from them. His mouth curved. It was not a kind smile. 12 hours earlier, Alina had been losing an argument she never should have entered. The East Wing servants' hall was narrow and perpetually damp, lit by 2 oil lamps that the head housekeeper, Marta, refused to replace on principle. "Comfort breeds laziness," Marta liked to say, usually while assigning Alina the worst tasks on the rotation board. Tonight's personal favorite, washing the ritual linens before dawn, while every other servant in the Ashbourne estate slept. Alina had been folding her assignment sheet with the quiet precision of someone composing themselves before a scream when Drea appeared at her shoulder. Drea, full name Andrea Moss, third house servant, Alina's closest friend, and the single worst influence in her 22 years of cautious, careful, stay-out-of-trouble living, had looked at the assignment sheet and made a noise that could only be described as gleeful. "You have to do the ritual grounds." "I'm aware." The outer ritual grounds. Drea's eyes had gone bright with the particular energy she got right before suggesting something catastrophic. "That's past the east garden, past the perimeter markers." "Also aware." "Alina." Drea had grabbed her arm with both hands, the way she did when she wanted you to understand this was serious. "The Valewood is just past the perimeter markers." "I know where the Valewood is, Drea." Calla bet 3 silver marks that no one would get within 300 yards of the king's ritual tonight. Every guard in the estate is on ceremonial formation. No perimeter sweeps until after the alignment. Alina had given her a look that communicated several things at once. Primarily, "I know, I don't care, and wherever this is going, my answer is no." Drea had plowed ahead anyway. "I said I knew someone who could do it, someone quiet, someone fast. Someone who spent 2 years as a woodland gatherer before being reassigned to house staff and knows every animal trail in that forest." The silence that followed had been long enough for Alina to count every reason this was a terrible idea. She'd come up with 14. "All you have to do is get close enough to see the fire," Drea had said, her voice dropping to something soft and persuasive. "Not the king, not the pack, just the fire. Then walk back out and we split the silver. Easy." "Nothing about that is easy." "Alina." Drea's voice had gentled in the way that meant she was going for the actual target. "Your mother's medicine costs more this season. I know you've been trading dinner shifts for coin. This would cover 2 months." Alina had stared at the assignment sheet in her hands. Her mother, Lena Voss, retired seamstress, the East Village healer's most regular patient, needed the willow bark extract, the deep tissue poultice, the weekly visits that cost more than a servant's weekly wage and never quite stopped. 3 silver marks. She had not wanted to say yes. She had understood, with complete clarity, that saying yes was the kind of decision that looked survivable on paper and catastrophic in practice. She'd made exactly that kind of decision once before, at 16, and spent 2 years rebuilding the quiet, careful life it had cost her. Just the fire, she'd told herself. Look at the flame. Walk away. No one will know. "I keep 2/3, she'd said finally, Drea had thrown her arms around her neck. The Valewood at midnight was a different world. Alina knew forests. She'd grown up on the edge of this one, catalogued its moods and rhythms the way other girls catalogued gossip. She knew which routes crossed the path just east of the old well. She knew where the creek bent sharply before the second clearing. She knew the sound the wind made through the canopy when a storm was 2 hours out. She had not known the forest on a blood moon ritual night. It was awake. Not metaphorically. Not in the poetic way storytellers used that word. The Valewood on this night was operating on some frequency just below sound, a vibration that moved up through the ground and into the soles of her bare feet and sat at the base of her sternum like a second heartbeat. This was a mistake, she thought. This was an enormous, catastrophic, 3 silver marks was never worth dying for mistake. She kept moving anyway, because her mother's face existed somewhere behind every sensible objection. She moved carefully, keeping to the animal trails, placing each step with the practiced quiet of someone who'd spent years not disturbing things larger and better armed than herself. The ritual fire was visible from 200 yards, orange-red, far larger than she'd imagined, sending light up into the canopy in long shivering columns. The chanting reached her before she hit the 300-yard mark, and she slowed to a careful prowl, easing between 2 oaks at the clearing's edge. She could see the fire. That was enough. That was the deal. Look and leave. She looked at the pack first, 100 wolves kneeling in perfect silence, and the sight was so breathtaking, so entirely outside anything she'd ever witnessed from the servants' quarters, that she forgot herself for a moment. All that power, deliberately stilled. All that wildness, voluntarily contained. There was something almost unbearable about it, the way devotion looked when it was genuine and complete. Then she made the mistake of looking at the king. She hadn't meant to. 1 second, 2 at most. Enough to report back to Drea that yes, she'd seen the fire. That's 3 silver. Thank you, and good night. But Magnus Draven in person was a problem for careful intentions, because he was the kind of man who recalibrated your sense of scale. Not just tall, proportioned differently. The way something built to survive centuries is proportioned differently from something built for a single generation. He stood at the center of the ritual with the stillness of a mountain, one arm extended over the flame, silver-gray eyes half closed in concentration. She thought, he is beautiful, the way dangerous things are beautiful. The way a storm looks right before it destroys everything. She looked away. Turned to leave. The wind, traitorous and absolute, shifted directly toward the clearing. She watched it happen. That barely perceptible change in his posture. A stillness that was different from his ritual stillness. More focused, more animal. His outstretched hand went motionless over the flame. And then, with the slow deliberateness of something that had already decided, his head turned toward her. Their eyes didn't meet. The distance was too great, the dark too thick. But it didn't matter. Her body understood before her mind did. She moved. Behind her, the chanting faltered. She heard Seraphine's voice rise, urgent and disbelieving. She heard the sound that was worse than any sound. The sound of a man stepping away from something sacred without hesitation, without breaking stride, with the calm certainty of someone who had already weighed the cost and accepted it. Then came the silence. Hunting silence. Run, her body said. And this time, she didn't argue. The East Wing was never quiet, but at 3 a.m. it settled into a particular kind of hush. The hush of people pretending to sleep while actually listening for the footsteps of anyone who might confirm or deny the impossible rumors already moving through the estate like smoke under a door. Alina changed in the dark, pulled off the muddy dress, rolled it tight, pushed it to the bottom of her trunk beneath 2 folded work aprons. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed with her hands in her lap, and her heartbeat still not entirely convinced the danger was over. Down the hall, she could hear Drea's breathing, Too slow, too deliberate. Awake. Waiting. Alina lay down without knocking. She stared at the ceiling and did what her mother had taught her when the world became too large and too loud. Start with facts. Don't touch the feelings until you have somewhere to put them. Facts. She had entered a restricted sacred zone on a blood moon ritual night. The Alpha King had scented her presence from 50 yards during a high-concentration invocation. He had abandoned the final moments of a 6-year ritual preparation to follow her into the dark. He had found her. He had held her wrist, gently, and told her to go home. He had told her to lie about it. She pressed one hand flat against her sternum. That second heartbeat, the one the Veilwood had planted there, had not entirely left. It sat behind her ribs like an ember that didn't know it was supposed to go out. He released her, stepped back, put one careful yard of distance between them like it was a wall he could believe in. She was not going to think about that. She was not going to think about the way heat had climbed her arm when he'd caught her. She was not going to think about his hands. Clean, certain. The hands of a man who had never once in his life been someone's burden. She was absolutely not going to think about the way he'd said her name. Alina Voss. Like he was filing it somewhere permanent. A door opened down the corridor. Then footsteps. Heavy, official. Guard-issue boots. 2 sets. Alina closed her eyes. Too soon. The knock came on Drea's door first. She heard it through the wall. The formal 3-knock cadence of a summons, not a search. She sat up slowly. Her own door opened before she reached it, and the guard filling the frame was young and uncomfortable looking, which meant he'd drawn the short diplomatic straw tonight. Alina Voss? Yes. The High Priestess requests your presence. A pause. Immediately. Drea appeared in the hallway behind him, blanket around her shoulders, her face doing something complicated. Alina met her eyes for half a second, long enough to see the guilt in them, and looked away. Not with anger. She understood. Drea had a particular weakness for filling silences with information, and between the moment the ritual flame had died and the moment the guards had started moving, someone in this hall had started asking questions. Alina dressed in 60 seconds and followed the guard through 3 wings she'd only ever cleaned, never occupied, her bare feet silent on stone floors that cost more per tile than her monthly wage. Seraphine's chambers were at the far end of the north corridor, where the walls were older and the torches burned lower, and everything smelled faintly of dried herbs and cold ceremony. Alina was shown in without announcement. The door closed behind her. The High Priestess stood at her window with her back to the room, looking out at the Veilwood's dark edge. She was 60 years old and looked like something carved rather than born, sharp-featured, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of a person who had spent decades making other people feel that stillness as pressure. Sit. Alina sat. You were at the ritual clearing tonight. I was foraging in the... Do not. Seraphine's voice was quiet. Absolute. I am 60 years old, and I have served 4 Alpha Kings. I can distinguish between a servant who is foraging and a servant who ran through my sacred ground, close enough to make my king abandon a 6-year preparation with 40 seconds remaining. A pause, precise as a blade. Do not lie to me. Alina closed her mouth. A beat. I was taking a bet, she said. A foolish one. I needed the silver. She kept her voice flat, factual, stripped of the details that would implicate Drea. I didn't intend to get that close. The wind shifted. Seraphine was quiet for a long architectural moment. The wind, she said slowly, did not just shift, child. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Alina watched the High Priestess finally turn from the window, and for the first time, beneath the iron authority and the ceremonial composure, she saw something that looked almost like fear. Not of Alina. Something larger. Something that had been waiting. Do you know what you are? Seraphine asked. The question made no sense. A servant, third house. What blood runs in you? Seraphine crossed the room with unhurried precision and stopped before her, close enough that Alina had to resist the urge to lean back. The old woman studied her face with an intensity that felt like archaeology, like she was looking for something she'd suspected was buried there and had just found the first edge of it. Your mother, Lena Voss. Who was her mother? The shift was jarring. My grandmother? Mira. She died before I was born. She was a wanderer, lived in the old forests, my mother always said. A wanderer. Seraphine repeated the word the way someone repeats a known euphemism. Her expression closed like a door. Of course. What does my grandmother have to do with... You disrupted the most powerful ritual this territory has conducted in a generation. Seraphine's voice was precise and merciless. Not by physical interference, not by malicious intent, by existing within the Alpha's scent range. A breath. Do you understand what that means? Alina knew pack lore the way all estate servants did. The basics, the ceremonies, enough to do her job correctly. The sacred flame was protective. Alpha bonds were complex, partially spiritual. The Veilwood was sacred ground, and she had violated it, and the king had abandoned his most important obligation because of her. She knew all of that. None of it answered the question in Seraphine's eyes. No, she admitted. The high priestess looked at her for a long, measuring moment, the kind of look that arrived at conclusions and then locked them away. It means the king's wolf recognized something in you that his rational mind has not yet named, she said carefully. And until he names it, or chooses not to, you are the single greatest threat to the stability of this pack I have encountered in 40 years of service. The room felt smaller. I'm a servant, Alina said. Quieter this time, almost a question. Yes. Seraphine moved back to her window. For now, that is exactly what you will remain. You will do your work. You will avoid the king's path. You will not return to the Veilwood. A pause. And you will not tell anyone what he said to you tonight. Alina rose, inclined her head, walked to the door. She was 3 steps into the corridor when Seraphine's voice followed her. Soft, strange. Nothing like the iron she'd used for the rest of the conversation. Your grandmother's name wasn't Mira Voss, child. Ask your mother what name she chose to forget. The door clicked shut. Alina stood in the cold corridor. The ember behind her ribs pulsed once. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Like something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. By the time dawn broke over the Ashbourne estate, 3 things had happened. The Pack Council had convened an emergency session. The Veilwood sacred markers had been inspected and found undisturbed, which meant, technically, that no trespass could be formally proven. And Magnus Draven had issued a single directive before dismissing every advisor, council member, and concerned senior wolf from his study. Until further notice, the East Wing household staff will remain on standard rotation. No reassignments. It was a meaningless administrative statement on its face. Routine, even. The kind of thing an Alpha King said to signal that normal operations would continue despite disruption, that the pack should not panic, that everything was under control. Every senior wolf in that room understood it was not administrative. It was a location marker. Magnus sat alone in his study after they filed out and stared at his own hands on the desk in front of him for a very long time. The rational argument was straightforward. He had scented something unusual. Wolves were sensitive to biological anomalies, bloodlines, rare genetic traits. Even certain emotional states could trigger heightened awareness in an alpha during elevated ritual sensitivity. He had reacted instinctively, as any apex predator might, to an unexpected stimulus during a vulnerable moment. The disruption to the ritual was costly in the long term, but manageable. The pack was strong. The territory's wards would thin slowly. They had time to consult Seraphine about alternative blessing ceremonies. He had rehearsed this argument 4 times before the council arrived. It had been convincing enough. His voice had been steady. His eyes had been level. He had not slept, not because of the council, not because of the fallout, not because of the 1,000 calculations a king must make when a sacred rite fails publicly and the pack's confidence trembles. He had not slept because every time he closed his eyes, he was back at the creek in the dark, watching a girl in a gray servant's dress calculate whether a current was survivable, and finding, against all rational explanation, that the answer she arrived at mattered to him more than anything currently on his desk. He got up, walked to the window. The veil wood was pale gold in the early light, its edges softened by morning mist, looking nothing like the thing it had been at midnight. Harmless. Ordinary. A forest. Cedar and rain, his wolf said, unhelpfully. Enough, Magnus told it. He had spent 30 years as the kind of man people stepped aside for. As a young alpha, he'd had to learn the weight of that, the way people recalibrated around him, the way conversations changed when he entered them, the way no one, ever, looked at him and said something unpolished. He had made peace with it the way you make peace with weather, not happily, but practically. It was the cost of being what he was. She had asked why, like it was the most obvious question in the world. Not carefully, not politically, not with the half-second calculation he watched everyone else perform before they opened their mouths in his presence. Just why, direct and genuine and slightly indignant, like she'd already accepted the consequences and wanted the information anyway. He turned from the window. He needed to stop thinking about this. A knock. Come. It was Dorian, his beta, his oldest friend, 34 years old and constitutionally incapable of pretending a difficult situation was comfortable. He closed the door, took one look at the untouched sleep quarters, the dark circles, the desk that had clearly hosted several hours of very intense and very circular thinking, and said nothing. He sat down across from Magnus and waited. How bad is the council? Magnus asked. 6 of 12 want a formal investigation into the trespass. Dorian's voice was measured. 3 want to move the deadline on the next ritual window forward. 2 want to wait and see. Counselor Harwick used the word omen 4 times in 20 minutes, so I discount his input accordingly. And Seraphine? Says nothing publicly. Dorian paused, in the particular way that meant the next sentence was the real one. She met privately with someone last night. One of the servants. East Wing, 3rd House. Former woodland gatherer. On house staff about a year. He watched Magnus's face with the careful attention of someone who'd known him long enough to read the things he didn't show. Clean record. Nothing notable in her file. Her name is Alina Voss. The desk was very still under Magnus's hands. Did she? You want me to run a full background? The pause before Magnus answered lasted exactly long enough to tell Dorian everything. No, Magnus said. I'll handle it myself. Dorian's eyebrows moved, fractionally. He had the discipline not to say the 3 things that were visibly occurring to him. He said instead, quietly, not the beta to the Alpha King, just one man to another. Magnus, what happened in the woods last night? Magnus looked at him. I don't know yet, he said. And the honesty of it sat strangely. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Raw. Like a window opened in a room that had been sealed for years. Dorian studied him, nodded once. He rose, moved toward the door, and stopped with his hand on the frame. She's on courtyard rotation today, he said without turning around. East Garden, starts at the 2nd bell. He left before Magnus could respond. The 2nd bell rang while Alina was on her knees pulling dead growth from the base of the East Garden's stone wall, and she was thinking about her grandmother, Mira Voss. Except apparently that wasn't her name. Apparently her mother had chosen to forget whatever her name actually was, which was the kind of sentence Alina had been turning over since 3 in the morning without arriving at a single useful conclusion. She pulled a fistful of dead vine from between two stones and sat back on her heels. The east garden was one of the quieter parts of the estate. A long rectangular space bordered by old stone, the veil wood visible at its far edge beyond the perimeter markers. She'd always liked it for exactly that reason. Quiet, orderly, a place where the work was simple and the only thing watching her was the sky. She felt him before she heard him. Not a sound, not a shadow, just a change in the quality of the air. That same atmospheric shift she'd felt in the Valewood, the sense of something large and deliberate entering the same space as her lungs. She did not look up. Her hands kept moving. Dead vine, stone, dead vine. Do your work. Keep your eyes down. You are furniture. You are invisible. You're going to pull the live roots out with the dead ones if you keep that angle. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low. Even. The kind of voice that didn't raise itself because it had never needed to. Alina looked up. Magnus Draven was standing 3 feet away in plain riding clothes. No ceremonial robes, no formal insignia, nothing that announced what he was, except the fact that he was entirely unmistakable. He was looking at her hands. At the vine she was holding. Like this was a normal conversation between a king and the woman who had accidentally destroyed 6 years of his spiritual preparation 14 hours ago. She looked down at the vine in her grip. He was right. She'd gotten the live root. "Thank you," she said, flatly. Precisely. "My king." He crouched down beside her. Not close, but close enough. And the second heartbeat behind her ribs woke up immediately, traitorous and loud. "I have a question," he said. "You have many questions," she said, before she could stop herself. "My king." The ghost of that not-quite smile moved across his face. "Your grandmother," he said quietly. "What do you know about her?" Every muscle in Alina's body went very still. Alina did not answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer, and they both knew it. She set the vine down on the stone wall with careful, deliberate hands, the hands of someone buying 3 seconds to decide how much truth cost today. The morning air was cold and still. Somewhere behind the estate's main wing, she could hear the distant sounds of pack life resuming its rhythms, guards changing shift, kitchen fires being stoked, the low murmur of a world pretending yesterday hadn't happened. "I know very little," she said finally. "She died before I was born. My mother doesn't speak of her." A pause. "Didn't speak of her. Until last night I had no reason to ask." Magnus was quiet beside her. He'd settled into a stillness that was different from his formal stillness. Less performed, more natural. The stillness of a man who was genuinely listening rather than waiting for his turn to speak. She was not going to find that appealing. She had made that decision at approximately 4 a.m, and she intended to honor it. "Seraphine spoke to you," he said. "Not a question. She summoned me." "What did she say?" Alina turned to look at him directly, which was a tactical error she recognized in real time, and committed to anyway. Up close, in morning light, without the dramatic architecture of a blood moon ritual behind him, he was somehow more difficult, not less. The ceremonial distance was gone. He was just present, watching her with those silver-gray eyes that processed everything with that infuriating, unhurried precision. "She told me to avoid your path," Alina said. "My king." Something moved behind his eyes. "And yet." "You came to the East Garden," she pointed out. "I was already here." The ghost of that almost smile again. She was beginning to resent how much she noticed it. "She said something else," he said. "About your blood." Alina's jaw tightened. "She said my grandmother's name wasn't what my mother told me it was." She kept her voice even, factual. "She didn't say what it actually was." "No," Magnus said. "She wouldn't." The certainty in those two words landed strangely, like he knew something that had a shape she couldn't see yet. Something with edges and weight, something that had been sitting in a room she'd never been allowed to enter. "You know what she meant," Alina said. It wasn't a question either. Magnus looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the Valewood, visible beyond the perimeter markers at the garden's far edge, its morning face mild and golden, and nothing like what it had been at midnight. "I have a theory," he said carefully. "I want to be wrong." "Why?" His eyes came back to hers. "Because if I'm right, your life becomes significantly more complicated than it already is." Alina almost laughed. It came out as something shorter and sharper. "My king, in the last 14 hours I have accidentally destroyed a 6-year sacred ritual, been summoned by your high priestess at 3 a.m, and been told my entire family history may be a careful lie." She pulled another fistful of dead vine from the wall. "My life is already complicated." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Mira Voss was not a wanderer." Alina's hand stopped moving. "She was a Valeborn," he said. "The last one recorded in the Ashbourne territories, a bloodline so old that most of the pack considers them mythology." He paused. "They were the original keepers of the sacred flame, before the alphas, before the priestesses." Another pause, slower. "The flame doesn't respond to them the way it responds to wolves. It recognizes them, like a door recognizing a key." The garden was very quiet. "That's why the fire went out," Alina said. The words arrived flat and stunned. "When you left, it wasn't just because you walked away. The flame's alignment requires the alpha's focus," Magnus said. "But my focus requires—" He stopped, chose the next word with visible care. "Stability. Stability." She turned the word over, felt its actual meaning underneath its polished surface, felt heat climb the back of her neck, and absolutely refused to acknowledge it. "I destabilized you," she said. "Yes. By existing within your scent range." "Yes." A beat. "That is," she said with great restraint, "extremely inconvenient." This time the smile arrived fully, brief, surprised, genuine, and it was so different from the not kind smile at the creek that for a moment she forgot to breathe. Then it was gone, and he was composed again, and she was back to pretending her ribcage was behaving normally. Alina. Her name in his mouth, without the title attached, without the formal weight of Voss after it, just her name, plain and direct. There are people on this council who will not be satisfied with last night remaining unexplained. When they find the explanation— Footsteps. Fast ones. Coming from the estate's side entrance. Magnus rose fluidly. The crouching casualness gone. The king back in full. Spine straight. Jaw set. Alina was on her feet a half-second behind him on pure instinct, her body reading the urgency in his before her mind caught up. 3 guards rounded the garden stone corner, and behind them, moving with the brisk, deliberate energy of someone who had decided something and was now executing it, came Counselor Harwick. 60 years old, silver-bearded, and carrying the particular expression of a man who believed the universe confirmed his suspicions on a regular basis. His eyes found Alina, and stayed there. "My king." He inclined his head to Magnus, with the precise minimum of deference his rank required. "I apologize for the interruption." His tone communicated that he did not apologize at all. "The council has identified a person of interest in last night's disruption." A pause, deliberate and performative. A servant was placed near the ritual grounds during the alignment window. His eyes hadn't left Alina's face. "We'd like her brought to the council chamber for formal questioning." The garden went very still. Alina kept her eyes forward, kept her hands loose at her sides. Servants bowed, servants folded. That thing in her spine was doing it again, refusing, quietly and stubbornly, to behave like what she was supposed to be. "The servant," Magnus said, "is on her assigned rotation. With respect." "Which I assigned." His voice carried no heat. It didn't need to. "This morning." Harwick's jaw tightened. "My king, the council has authority in matters of ritual security. The council has authority I permit it to have." Still no heat. Just the flatness of a fact being stated by the person who made it true. "She will not be questioned today." A pause. "When I have something to tell the council, I will tell it." Harwick looked at Alina one more time. A long, calculating look that she felt like a cold hand between her shoulder blades. Then he inclined his head, turned, and left. The guards followed. The garden settled back into quiet. Alina exhaled slowly, realized her heart was going considerably faster than the situation strictly warranted, and that Magnus was still standing exactly 1 careful yard away, and that he had just, without raising his voice or making a single promise, placed himself between her and the council's reach. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it in the place where she was keeping everything else she didn't know what to do with, which was getting crowded. "You should go to your mother," Magnus said quietly. "Today, ask her about the name." She looked at him. "And then?" she asked. His silver eyes held hers for one long, unmistakable moment. "Then come find me," he said. The East Village was a 30-minute walk from the estate along a road that ran parallel to the Valewood's edge, close enough that you could hear the trees if the wind was right, far enough that most people forgot to be afraid of them. Alina had walked it hundreds of times. She knew every rut in the path, every farm gate, every dog that would bark, and everyone that wouldn't bother. She walked it now with her hood up and her mind running in 3 directions simultaneously. Valeborn. The word sat in her chest alongside the ember that wouldn't go out. She turned it over the way you turn over a stone you've walked past 1,000 times and never thought to look under. The original keepers of the sacred flame. So old most of the pack considers them mythology. She was not mythology. She scrubbed floors. She pulled dead vine from garden walls. She made careful, practical decisions about which shifts to trade for coin and how far 3 silver marks could stretch across her mother's medicine costs. Mythology did not have calluses, and yet, she thought about the Valewood at midnight, that vibration under her feet, that second heartbeat that had no explanation she could file under coincidence or imagination. She thought about the way the forest had felt awake in a way she'd attributed to the ritual, to the blood moon, to the collective spiritual energy of 100 wolves kneeling in devotion. She thought about the fact that she'd felt it before. Quieter, easier to dismiss. Every time she worked near the forest's edge, every time she passed the perimeter markers. A low hum, like a note just below hearing, that she had spent 2 years as a woodland gatherer learning to treat as background. She walked faster. Her mother's house was at the village's eastern edge. Small, stone-built, with a kitchen garden that Lena Voss tended with the focused precision of someone who understood that growing things was a form of argument against despair. The door was unlocked, as it always was. The fire was burning low. Lena herself was at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, a wool shawl pulled tight across her shoulders. She was 53, and looked it honestly. Lined around the eyes, silver threading through dark hair she'd given to Alina in color, but not in texture. She had the stillness of someone who had learned to conserve energy the way a careful person conserves coin. She looked up when Alina came in. Something moved in her face. Recognition, first. Then something underneath it, older and more guarded, that Alina had never had a name for, and was now beginning to suspect she did. "You're here early," her mother said. "I was given leave." Alina sat across from her, pulled off her hood, put her hands flat on the table, the way she did when she wanted a conversation to stay in the facts and not drift into the comfortable fog her mother sometimes retreated into. "Mama, I need you to tell me about your mother." Lena's hands tightened around her cup. "You know about your grandmother," she said carefully. "She was a wanderer. Her name." Alina kept her voice even. "Her real name, not the one you gave me." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire popped once. Outside, a bird called and went silent. Lena Voss set down her cup with the deliberateness of someone setting down something heavier than ceramic. "Who told you?" she said. Not a question. Her voice had gone flat in a way Alina recognized. The tone her mother used when she had been waiting for something for a long time, and it had finally arrived, and she wasn't sure whether to be relieved or devastated. "The High Priestess." A long breath. "Seraphine." Her mother said the name the way you say the name of someone you've been half expecting to hear from for 20 years. "Of course." "Mama." Her name was Evelyn. Lena said it quietly, like releasing something she'd held underwater. Evelyn of the Valewood. That was what they called her. What she called herself. A pause. She didn't use a family name because she didn't believe bloodlines should be owned. She had strong opinions about a great many things. Alina sat very still. She was Vale-born. Her mother looked at her sharply. "Seraphine told you that much." "The king told me." The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. Lena looked at her daughter. Really looked, the way she occasionally did when she forgot to keep her expression managed. And what moved across her face was a complicated mixture of fear and grief, and something that looked, bewilderingly, like recognition. "He knows what you are," her mother said softly. "He has a theory." Alina leaned forward. "I need you to make it a fact or not. I need to know what I'm carrying." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she rose, moved to the small cabinet beside the hearth, and opened the bottom drawer. The one Alina had been told as a child held nothing but old linens. She reached past the linens, past something wrapped in oilcloth at the drawer's back, and withdrew a small leather journal. Its cover dark with age, its spine cracked from years of having been opened and opened again. She set it on the table between them. "Your grandmother left this when she went," Lena said. "I was 3 years old. I barely remember her face." Her hands rested on the cover without opening it. She said if the Valewood ever called her granddaughter home, this would explain what she couldn't stay to say. Alina looked at the journal. The ember behind her ribs pulsed, warm, certain, and completely outside her control. "Has it?" her mother asked quietly. "Called you?" Alina thought about the ritual clearing, the vibration under her bare feet, the second heartbeat, the way the forest had known her before she knew what it knew. "Yes," she said. Her mother closed her eyes briefly, nodded, the way you nod when a thing you dreaded has been confirmed, and the dread is somehow easier than the not knowing. "Then take it," she said. "And Alina." Her hand caught her daughter's wrist, the same wrist, and Alina felt something lurch sideways in her chest at the echo of that. There are people who have been looking for the last Valeborn for a very long time, not to protect her. Her eyes were steady and serious and stripped of every comfortable softness. "Your grandmother ran. She changed her name. She hid in plain sight for 30 years. "I know," Alina said. "I think it may already be too late to hide." She tucked the journal inside her coat. She was 20 minutes down the road home, the Valewood whispering at her left shoulder and the journal warm against her ribs, when she heard the horses. Not estate horses. The gait was wrong, heavier, faster, purposeful in a way that didn't match a routine patrol. She counted 4 sets of hooves before she stepped off the road and pressed herself into the tree line, hood up, breathing shallow. 4 riders in dark cloaks came around the bend. No ashbourne crest. No identifying colors. Moving fast and watching the road with the focused attention of people looking for something specific. One of them turned his head toward the tree line as he passed. He looked directly at the space where she was standing. He didn't stop, but he smiled. And it was not a kind smile. She did not run immediately. Running was what prey did, and prey got chased, and she had learned it 7 years old, from her mother, who had learned it from a grandmother she barely remembered, that the worst thing you could do when something dangerous was looking for you was move. So she stood in the tree line and breathed and watched the 4 riders continue down the road at a pace that was deliberate without being frantic, the way professionals moved when they were confident their target had nowhere meaningful to go. The last rider, the one who had smiled, did not look back. That was worse than if he had. Alina waited until they rounded the path's far bend, and the sound of hooves thinned to silence. Then she moved. Not back to the road. Deeper into the trees, one hand pressed flat against the journal inside her coat, the other finding branches and trunks by memory and by the faint instinct that had been guiding her feet in this forest since she was old enough to follow her mother to the gathering grounds. The veil wood received her without resistance. That was the first thing she noticed. The absence of the usual friction, the sense of trespass that any forest communicated to those who didn't belong in it. The undergrowth didn't catch at her dress. The roots didn't find her feet. The canopy above her shifted in a wind that wasn't blowing anywhere else, and the light came down in long, deliberate columns that illuminated exactly the ground she needed to see next. This is not normal, she thought. The forest agreed. She felt it in the soles of her bare feet. That vibration again, lower and more purposeful than it had been at the ritual, more directed. Less like a sound and more like a sentence. Less like ambient energy and more like a hand placed carefully at the small of her back. This way, it said. In no language she could name. In the only language that had ever mattered. She followed it. Behind her, on the road, the 4 riders stopped. The one who had smiled dismounted first. He crouched at the road's edge where the packed earth met the first line of trees, and studied the ground with the patience of someone who had been doing this for a long time. He found what he was looking for in seconds. The impression of a small foot in the soft earth at the tree line's edge, toes pointing inward toward the dark. He stood. She went in, he said. The rider to his left made a sound of discomfort. Nobody goes into the Veil Wood alone. Not at this hour. Not without... She did. He remounted. Unhurried. Certain. The Veil Wood will slow her down. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't know it for another 10 minutes. Alina moved fast and low, letting the forest lead her in a path that curved northeast. Away from the estate's main gates, away from the road, toward the inner Valewood where the trees grew oldest, and the light fell strangest, and the ordinary rules of navigation had always been more suggestions than facts. She didn't let herself think about who those riders were, or what they wanted, or how they knew to be on that road at that moment. That was a problem for later. The problem for now was distance and direction, and the specific focused calm that descended on her when a situation became simple enough. Survive this, everything else after. The journal pressed warm against her ribs. She could hear them behind her now. Not on foot. They'd left the horses at the tree line, which meant they were better in forests than most people had the sense to be. 4 sets of footsteps, spread wide, coordinating without speaking. Professional, patient, closer than they should be, she thought. She pushed harder. The Valewood responded. A curtain of low-hanging moss swung closed behind her like a door pulled shut by an invisible hand. A root system she'd just cleared rose fractionally at the path's edge, not enough to see, exactly enough to catch an unfamiliar boot. Behind her she heard a curse, a stumble, the sound of coordination briefly disrupted. She had perhaps 30 seconds. She used them to climb. The oak she chose was old enough to have a second canopy, a broad platform of interlocked branches 10 feet up, where the trunk forked into 3. She went up it the way she'd climbed trees since childhood, hand over hand, dress be damned, and pulled herself onto the fork and pressed flat against the bark, and made herself as small and still and absent as she knew how to be. Below her, the 4 riders entered the space she'd just left. She watched them through the leaves. The smiling one moved differently from the others. Slower, more deliberate, his head slightly tilted as though he were listening for something below the range of ordinary hearing. He stopped directly below her oak. Alina stopped breathing. He stood there for 10 seconds that felt architectural. Each one load-bearing, each one holding the next one up. He turned in a slow half-circle. His eyes moved across the tree line, the undergrowth, the moss curtain, the root system. They did not move upward. The forest was very, very still. Then his head tilted toward the northeast, toward something she couldn't see, and he made a short gesture to the others. They moved, past her tree, deeper into the dark. Their footsteps thinned and then disappeared entirely, and the veil wood settled back around her with the quiet satisfaction of something that had made a decision and was comfortable with it. Alina let out a breath so slowly it barely qualified as breathing. She stayed in the tree for 2 full minutes. Then she descended, found the northeast path, and ran, in the opposite direction from the one they'd taken, back toward the estate's eastern perimeter, moving fast enough that the cold air burned, and her legs ached, and she stopped thinking about anything except the next step, and the one after that. She came out of the tree line at the perimeter markers, just as the second afternoon bell sounded from the estate's main tower, and Magnus was standing at the garden wall. Not waiting. He wasn't positioned like someone waiting. He was mid-turn toward the estate's side entrance, jaw set, moving with the specific purposeful energy of a man who had just made a decision and was executing it, which meant he'd been about to come in after her. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. They stood 20 feet apart in the pale afternoon light, both of them reading the same story off the other's face. Her breathlessness, the mud on her dress, the hand pressed flat against her coat where the journal sat. His jaw, the controlled stillness that she was learning meant the opposite of calm. He crossed the distance between them in 8 strides and stopped close, closer than the careful yard he'd maintained all morning, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, and the second heartbeat in her ribs went from ember to open flame without asking her permission. His eyes moved across her face, her arms, cataloging. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "How many?" 4. No ashbourne crest, dark cloaks. They knew my road. His jaw tightened in a way that was very quiet and very final, like a door being locked from the inside. "The journal?" he said. Her hand pressed harder against her coat. "I have it." He looked at her for one long, unguarded moment, something moving behind his eyes that wasn't calculation, wasn't strategy, wasn't anything she had a clean word for. And then he stepped back. 1 careful yard. That wall he kept building and kept not quite believing in. "Come inside," he said. "Now." She followed him through the garden gate, the veil wood at her back whispering in a language she was only beginning to understand, the journal warm against her heart, and the terrifying quiet certainty settling in her chest that she was no longer running from anything. She was running toward something. She just hadn't decided yet whether that was worse. Here are chapters 8 and 9, exactly 1,200 words each, the truth named, the bond undeniable, and everything about to break open. Magnus's private study was nothing like she'd imagined. She hadn't imagined it. She corrected herself immediately, because imagining the Alpha King's private rooms was not something servants did, not something she did, not something she was going to acknowledge having done even internally at 11 o'clock on a night when her entire understanding of her own blood had been rearranged twice in 12 hours. It was smaller than she'd expected. warmer. Books on every wall, not for display. Spines cracked, pages marked, the evidence of actual reading rather than collected authority. A desk that looked like it had hosted 1,000 difficult decisions and hadn't been decorative a single day of its life. A fire burning low and practical in the grate. Dorian was there when they entered, standing at the window with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been holding a great many things together by sheer competence and would like an update. He looked at Alina, at the mud on her dress, the set of her jaw, the hand still pressed against her coat. And then at Magnus, and made the decision not to say any of the things that were clearly occurring to him. 4 riders, Magnus said without preamble. No crest. They knew her route. Dorian's expression shifted into something more focused and considerably less comfortable. Harwick? Possibly. Or someone using Harwick's noise as cover. Magnus moved to the desk. I need the Northern Road watch tonight. Quietly. Done. Dorian looked at Alina one more time. Not unkindly, but with the careful assessment of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation in real time. Then he left, pulling the door closed behind him with a softness that was its own kind of statement. The room was very quiet. Alina stood near the fire because her hands were cold, and she needed something practical to do with the fact that she was alone in the Alpha King's study at mid-afternoon with mud on her dress and a dead woman's secrets pressed against her heart. You can sit, Magnus said. I'm fine standing. He looked at her. She looked at the fire. A beat passed in which several things went unsaid by mutual, unspoken agreement. The journal, he said. She drew it out and held it for a moment. The leather dark and soft with age, the cover unmarked, the whole thing radiating that same low warmth she'd felt since her mother placed it in her hands. Like it recognized her. Like it had been waiting with the specific patience of something that had never doubted the wait would end. She opened it. The handwriting inside was nothing like she'd expected from a woman described as a wanderer of old forests. It was precise and elegant, each letter formed with the care of someone who understood that words, written down, became a different kind of permanent than words spoken. The ink had faded to a warm brown at the edges and stayed dark at the center, as though the most important parts had refused to diminish. She read the first page aloud without making a conscious decision to. If you are reading this, the Valewood has called you home. Do not be afraid of what you are. Be afraid instead of those who want to use it, because they have always existed, and they have always known what we are worth to them. We are not weapons. We are not tools. We are the flame's memory. We are the thing that keeps it honest. The fire in the grate shifted. The room felt different. Not larger, exactly. Deeper. Alina turned the page. The second entry was dated 30 years ago, 2 months before her mother was born. Her grandmother had written it in a single sitting, she could tell. The words ran close together, the urgency visible in the pressed ink, the way a sentence occasionally abandoned its careful formation and became something rawer. The Valeborn do not choose the Alpha. The flame chooses. It has always been this way. The Alpha's bond to the sacred flame is a bond of purpose, but the Valeborn's bond to the Alpha is a bond of origin. 2 halves of the same fire. One cannot reach full strength without the other. This is why they have hunted us. Not because we are dangerous alone. Because together, Alpha and Valeborn, we are something they cannot control. The silence in the room was absolute. Alina looked up from the journal. Magnus was standing at his desk, very still, his eyes on the middle distance. That stillness she now understood was not composure, but its opposite. The place he went when something had moved him past the point where composure was architecture he could inhabit. 2 halves of the same fire, she said. Yes. That's what you didn't want to be right about. Yes. She closed the journal slowly, held it in both hands, felt the warmth of it move up through her palms and into her arms, and settle, inevitably, in the place behind her ribs where the ember had been living since midnight of the previous day. "It explains the ritual," she said, keeping her voice factual, clinical. The voice of someone organizing information, not the voice of someone standing in a warm room with a man she had no business feeling warm near. Your focus, the flame responding to proximity, why Seraphine was afraid. Yes. It also explains who those writers were. She looked at him directly. Someone already knows. Someone has been watching for the last Veilborn for long enough to have people on the road. Yes. He moved from behind the desk, not toward her, but not away, repositioning the way a person does when a conversation requires them to be somewhere other than behind furniture. The Veilborn have been hunted for 3 generations. The bloodline was believed extinct. A pause. Your grandmother was very good at disappearing. She taught my mother to forget her own name, Alina said. That's how good she was. Magnus was quiet for a moment. You're not afraid, he said. Not an accusation, observation, the careful, genuine kind. She considered the question honestly. I'm terrified, she said. I'm just also... She stopped. Looked for the right word in a place where there weren't many good options. Tired of not knowing what I am. Whatever this is. She pressed her hand flat against her coat where the journal had been. It's mine. They don't get to take it. Something shifted in his expression. That unguarded flicker she'd seen at the creek, the one she didn't think he intended, arrived again and stayed a moment longer this time. He said her name. Not Alina Voss, not the servant. Just Alina. Quiet and direct and carrying a weight she felt in her sternum. I can protect you within the estate, he said. But the council meets tomorrow. Harwick will push for a formal inquiry. If your bloodline becomes part of the record, then I become a political object, she said, instead of a person. Yes. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she'd been carefully not doing since the creek, since the garden, since every moment in between when the careful yard of distance had felt less like a wall, and more like a shared pretense they were both maintaining out of dwindling conviction. He looked back. The fire in the grate was the only sound. Then we don't let it become part of the record, she said. His eyes held hers. We, he said. The word sat between them. Small, enormous. She felt it land in the place behind her ribs and stay. I believe that's what I said, she told him. My king. The corner of his mouth moved. Not the not kind smile. Something entirely different. Something that rearranged his face into something younger and realer, and considerably more dangerous to her continued pretense of being unaffected. Alina, he said quietly. Stop calling me that. She held his gaze for one long, reckless moment. Then tell me what to call you, she said. The fire shifted. He took one step toward her, slow, deliberate, nothing accidental about it, and closed half of the careful yard between them. Not all of it. Half. Enough to be a choice without being a declaration. Enough to make her breath go shallow and her hands grip the journal harder, and the ember behind her ribs become something that no longer answered to the word ember. Magnus, he said simply. The door opened. Dorian stood in the frame, his expression carrying the specific apology of a man interrupting something he wishes he weren't interrupting but has no choice. The Northern Riders, he said. They weren't alone. There are 12 more at the territory's edge. A pause. They're asking for a council audience, under the banner of the Ashen Court. The warmth in the room didn't disappear. It sharpened. Alina looked at Magnus. Magnus looked at her. The Ashen Court, she said carefully. Should I know that name? His jaw set in that quiet, final way. They're the ones who've been hunting your bloodline for 3 generations, he said. And they were already inside the territory's edge. The Ashen Court arrived the following morning. Not 12 riders, 23. They came up the main approach at a pace designed to be seen, unhurried, impeccably formatted, each horse matched in color, and each rider matched in the court's signature gray and black. Their banner carried no animal, no symbol of strength, just a flame, rendered in silver thread on dark ground, a flame going out. Alina watched from the east wing's upper window, standing far enough back that she was shadow rather than presence, and felt the journal under her pillow like a coal through the mattress. She had not slept. She had read instead, all of it, every page, her grandmother's careful handwriting moving from urgent to reflective, to something almost tender in the final entries. As though Evelyn of the Valewood had understood she was writing to a granddaughter she would never meet and had decided, in the end, to tell the truth without armor. They will call themselves protectors. They will say the flame must be governed, must be kept stable, must not be left in the hands of a bloodline that answers to no court and no crown. They will be very convincing. They have had generations to practice. Do not let them name what you are. Names are ownership. You were not born to be owned. Alina had read that passage 4 times. She was thinking about it now, as the Ashen Court's lead rider dismounted in the main courtyard below. A man she hadn't seen before, tall and angular with close-cropped silver hair, despite being no older than 40. He moved with the calibrated ease of someone who spent a great deal of time managing how he was perceived. He looked up at the estate's facade, slowly, with the proprietary attention of someone taking inventory. His eyes passed across her window. She stepped back. Magnus met the Ashen Court in the formal reception hall, not the council chamber, not the Great Hall. A deliberate choice, Dorian had explained to her 2 hours earlier, when he'd appeared at the East Wing with the careful manner of a man delivering a briefing, and the underlying energy of a man who was managing 17 problems simultaneously. The reception hall signals courtesy without authority, Dorian had said. He's not granting them standing. He's giving them a chair. What do they want? Alina had asked. Dorian had looked at her with the steady, honest expression she was coming to understand was his default setting. They've been petitioning the Ashbourne territories for 3 years for access to the Valewood's inner sanctum. Ritual rites, research access. A pause. They've always been refused. And now they have a reason to push harder. Now they have a reason to push harder, he'd confirmed. He'd paused at the door. He wants you to stay in the East Wing today, visible, on rotation. As cover. As yourself. He'd said it simply. He doesn't want them to know he knows what you are. Not yet. She'd understood. She was safer as a servant no one was looking at than as a Valeborn everyone was hunting. The invisibility she'd spent a year perfecting inside this estate was, for the first time in her life, an actual asset. Servants bowed. Servants folded. Servants were furniture. She could be furniture. She'd been doing it for years. She was on corridor rotation when she heard them. Not the formal delegation. They were still in the reception hall. She could hear the low architecture of official conversation drifting from the south wing. These were 2 of the court's junior riders, separated from the formal party, moving through the east corridor with the quiet, purposeful energy of people who had been told to look for something specific. Alina kept her head down, her cloth moving in slow circles on the corridor's stone floor, her breathing even. The first rider passed her without a glance. Furniture. Invisible. The second slowed. She felt it before she heard it, that prickling at the back of her neck, the specific alertness of being watched by someone who hasn't decided yet what they're seeing. She kept her cloth moving, kept her eyes on the floor, kept every muscle in her body in the practiced looseness of someone who had nowhere interesting to be. His footsteps stopped. You. His voice was quiet, conversational, the way a trap sounds before it closes. How long have you been in this corridor? Since the second bell, sir." She looked up with the carefully calibrated expression of someone mildly surprised to be addressed. Not afraid, not defensive, just the mild attentiveness of a servant who has learned to respond to authority without giving it anything to grip. "Corridor rotation. East wing, third house." He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Then his nostrils flared. It was almost imperceptible, a fraction of a movement. But she saw it, and in the half-second that followed she understood what it meant, and the cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the stone floor under her knees. He could smell it, not the way Magnus had, not that overwhelming, ritual-breaking recognition. Something more trained, more clinical. Like a hunting dog taught to recognize a specific quarry, his eyes sharpened with the particular focus of a man who has just found what he was sent to find and is deciding how to handle the next 30 seconds. She moved first. She was on her feet before the decision fully formed, the cloth abandoned, turning toward the corridor's far end with the fast, low efficiency of someone who had spent the last 2 days being chased through various parts of this estate and its surrounding forest, and was developing an exhausting proficiency at it. He was faster than she expected. His hand caught her shoulder, not the wrist, the shoulder, spinning her around and pressing her back against the corridor wall in one practiced motion. Not violent, controlled. The grip of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly how much force was necessary to hold without harming, who understood that damaged goods were worth less than intact ones. "There's no reason to run," he said quietly, almost gently. "We're not here to hurt you." "Everyone who has ever said that sentence," she said, with a steadiness that surprised her, "was about to hurt someone." His grip tightened fractionally, and then he let go. Not because she'd convinced him, because something had changed in the corridor's atmosphere. That pressure drop she now recognized, that specific quality of air that meant something considerably more dangerous than herself, had entered the space. Magnus stood at the corridor's far end. He hadn't run. He never ran. She was beginning to understand. Because running implied something could outpace him. He'd simply arrived. And he was looking at the court rider's hand, which was no longer touching Alina, but whose position near her shoulder had been noted and filed with the quiet, permanent precision of a man who did not forget things that mattered. The rider stepped back, straightened, recalibrated into formality with impressive speed. "My king," he said. "I apologize. I was turned around." "You were in a restricted wing," Magnus said. His voice was completely even, without escort, during a formal reception. A pause that had weight in it. "That's a significant amount of wrong turns." The rider said nothing. Magnus looked at Alina. One glance, quick, complete, asking a question without words. She gave the answer the same way. "I'm fine. He knows." Something in Magnus's jaw set. "Return to the reception hall," he said to the rider. "Now." The rider left. The corridor was silent. Magnus crossed to her in 4 strides and stopped, not the careful yard this time. Half that. Close enough that she could feel the controlled tension in him, that storm held back by sheer will she'd identified on the first night and was now understanding was not a metaphor. "He scented you," she said quietly. "I know." "Which means they'll tell whoever sent them." "I know." His eyes moved across her face with that cataloging intensity she'd stopped trying to find neutral ground against. "Are you hurt?" "No." She held his gaze. "How long do we have?" He was quiet for exactly 1 second, the second in which she felt him calculate and arrive at an answer he didn't like. "Until the reception ends," he said. "After that, the court will move to the council. Harwick will give them what they need to make a formal claim." His voice was low and even, and entirely without the comfort of uncertainty. "By tomorrow morning, your status will be part of the territorial record." "Then we have tonight," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. The careful yard was gone, and neither of them was pretending otherwise, and the ember behind her ribs was a fire now, steady and real and entirely past the point of being managed. "Tonight," he said quietly. "I need to show you something in the Valewood. She almost said the last time you took me to the Valewood, you abandoned a 6-year ritual." She didn't, because his expression had shifted into something that wasn't strategy, wasn't calculation, wasn't the king managing a problem. It was the man who had stepped away from a sacred flame at the most important moment of his public life, because something in him recognized something in her before either of them had words for it. "All right," she said. He nodded once. And neither of them moved for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The Valewood at midnight was not the same forest it had been 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, it had been awake. Tonight, it was waiting. A distinction Alina felt the moment she crossed the perimeter markers, the vibration under her feet lower and more focused than she'd ever felt it, the canopy shifting in that sourceless wind, the light falling in columns that moved with her rather than around her. Magnus walked at her left shoulder. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. And she understood without it being said that the positioning was deliberate. He wasn't leading her somewhere. He was accompanying her somewhere she already belonged. "Harrison," she said quietly. "His family. You know what they did. His great-grandmother sat on this council 3 generations ago." His voice was low, even. She was the one who told the original court where to find the last Valeborn. A pause. She believed the flame was too powerful to remain in the hands of a bloodline that answered to no political authority. Her grandson inherited the mission, 15 years building influence across 4 territories. He glanced at her. "He needs a living Valeborn to complete it. Without one, he can maneuver for another generation and never hold the flame. With one, he can attempt a forced channeling, use the Valeborn's connection as a conduit, bypass the alpha bond, redirect the flame's energy to the court's ends." "And the Valeborn?" she asked. "Doesn't survive it." The trees received that sentence in silence. "We are not weapons," her grandmother had written. "We are not tools." "Then we end it tonight," Alina said. The inner sanctum was smaller than she'd imagined, and larger in every way that mattered. A natural clearing where the oldest oaks formed a perfect circle, their roots interlocked beneath the earth like a clasped hand. At the center stood the sacred flame's altar stone, cold and dark since the night Magnus had walked away from it. She stood at the clearing's edge and felt the Valewood gather itself around her the way it had in the oak above the court's riders. Deliberate, purposeful, something ancient recognizing something it had been waiting to recognize. "The journal's final entry," she said. "She wrote that the flame's first keepers didn't light it. They remembered it." She moved forward into the clearing. "The fire doesn't come from outside. The Valeborn doesn't serve the flame." She stopped at the altar's edge. "She is the flame." Magnus stood at the clearing's edge and said nothing, watching. Her hand moved to the altar stone. The cold lasted exactly 1 second. Then warmth, not external, not produced by anything outside her own skin, but rising from somewhere so deep it felt geological. It moved up through her palm, her arm, her chest, and arrived in the place behind her ribs where the ember had been living since the night she'd run through this forest with her lungs burning and her bare feet screaming and no idea what she was running toward. The sacred flame ignited. Silver white, the color of moonlight distilled into heat, rising from the altar stone in a column that reached the canopy and set the ancient oaks shivering in its light. The clearing became something between the physical world and whatever had existed before the physical world learned to be practical. Alina stood in the middle of it and felt, for the first time in 22 years of careful, quiet, invisible living, entirely and exactly like herself. From the estate, they would see the light. All of them. Harrison arrived within minutes. 6 riders, the clearing's edge, his 15 years of patience meeting its destination with terrible precision. He looked at the flame. at Alina, at Magnus. He read the scene with the efficiency of a man who had planned for most outcomes and was rapidly assessing which one this was. "Step away from the altar," he said, almost gently. "This doesn't have to be difficult." "No," Alina said. "It doesn't." He gestured to his riders. The veil wood moved, not violently, with the quiet, implacable certainty of something 10,000 years old making a decision. Roots rose at every entry point, living wood closing across the clearing's boundary with a sound like a long, satisfied exhale. The 6 riders stopped, stepped back, looked at the trees with the expressions of men whose plan had just met its first honest obstacle. Harrison didn't step back. He looked at Alina with the focused attention of a man recalculating. "You can't hold this alone," he said. "She's not alone." Magnus stepped into the flame's light. It recognized him the way it had recognized her, not consuming, but meeting, the way 2 things meet when they've been the same thing all along and are only now remembering it. The silver white deepened. The clearing hummed through bone and root, and every old thing that had waited for this specific convergence. Harrison read the situation with the intelligence of a man who knew when architecture had collapsed. His jaw set. "This isn't over," he said. "You entered my territory uninvited. You moved against my pack. You laid hands on someone under my protection." Magnus's voice was completely calm. "Leave now, and the formal record reflects a misunderstanding. Stay, and there won't be a court left to continue this argument." Harrison left. The roots lowered. The veilwood exhaled. Harwick lost his council seat the following morning. Quietly, finally, without performance. Alina's mother arrived at the estate by midday, escorted by Dorian's most trusted guards, settled into the East Wing's warmest room with a working fire, and Magnus's personal instruction that she was a guest of the house. Lena Voss walked through the estate's doors with the expression of a woman who had spent 20 years afraid of what her daughter was, and had decided overnight to be proud of it instead. Alina stood in the inner sanctum as afternoon light fell through the canopy onto the warm altar stone and thought about her grandmother. About a woman who had run, changed her name, loved her family enough to teach them to forget her, and been brave enough to leave a journal that said, "Do not be afraid of what you are." She had not been afraid. She was not a weapon, not a tool, not furniture that smelled like soap and exhaustion. She was the flame's memory. She was the last Veilborn. She understood now, something that had been decided in a forest 2 nights ago by a wolf that recognized her before either of them had words for it. She heard Magnus enter the clearing the way she heard the Veilwood breathe. Not with her ears, but with the part of her tuned to him since the moment his hand closed around her wrist, and the world tilted towards something that wasn't fear and never had been. She turned. He stopped close. Closer than the careful yard, closer than the half-yard in his study, the distance now of a decision already made by something older and more honest than either of them. "The bond," she said. "It needs to be completed." "Yes. And after, I stay. Not as a servant." "Not as a servant," he confirmed. "As what you are, Veilborn, the Flame's Keeper, under the protection of this pack and this alpha." His silver eyes held hers, and that unguarded realness she'd first seen at the creek was fully present now. No careful yard, no performed composure. "And mine." The word landed in the place behind her ribs and stayed. "I am not easy to protect," she said. "I noticed." The real smile, not the not kind one, not the ghost of one, warm and brief and entirely, devastatingly genuine. She closed the remaining distance herself. His arms came around her, and his mouth found the curve of her neck, and the bond completed the way the flame had ignited. Not from outside, but from something remembered, something that had always been true, and was only now being spoken aloud. She felt his wolf, and he felt her fire, and the veilwood above them shivered in silver light that had no source and needed none. She was not mythology. She was not invisible. She was not the servant in the gray linen dress who scrubbed floors and took foolish bets for coin and kept her spine straight in rooms where no one noticed spines. She was the last Veilborn. She was the flame. And she had just decided, clearly, finally, without apology, exactly where she belonged. In the INDC.